Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Carefulist Podcast. We're so glad you could join us. Today, we have Suzanne Scheer, who is a former caregiver, recovering attorney, and current financial planner. Welcome to the show, Suzanne.
Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for having me.
I am really glad you could join us because you are going to shed light on some very important topics. So let's start at the very beginning. Share with us. Huh? Let me try that again. See, I screwed up.
Uh,
Let's start at the very beginning. Let's hear your caregiving story.
sure. I'm an only child, and my parents were on the older side when they had me for the time. Now it wouldn't be that old. 35 and 42 now is not anything unusual, but back then, in the old days, they were on the older side. When I was 33, my son was 15 months old, and my mom fell and broke her hip. And that caused all kinds of things, including some spinal cord damage that impacted her hands, so she couldn't really write very well. So at that point, I started taking over my parents' finances. And then, she just had lots of health issues. It kept getting just kind of an on and off thing for several years. And then a few years later, my dad had a stroke. And that, after 2 years, led into end stage dementia that lasted for 3 years. So
Mm.
all this was about an 8 year period where I had my son was little, and luckily I live close by, so it wasn't an issue of having to be, doing this long distance. Thank God. That would have been really, really hard. But so I never actually did the physical care for them, but I was overseeing everything, coordinating, advocating,
Mhm.
picking up medications, food, just going back and forth. And For the most part, at first my parents were at home, and then the last 3 years for my dad, he was in a nursing home, luckily
Mhm.
very close to my house. But so it would be like going to see him, and then my mom was either at home or in and out of the hospital or short-term rehab after the hospital. And it's just kind of a never-ending thing where
Yeah.
I never knew when I was going to get a phone call or when I would, something would happen. And so I was basically just, they talk about, your cortisol levels. I mean, mine was, if it had been measured, I'm sure it would have been off the charts, because I was always I was just, my nerve endings were, at my fingertips. It was like, I was just very jumpy and very like, like waiting for the next thing to happen. And
Yes.
um, so sorry about that. I thought it was stopped. So, it was just, it just, I didn't feel like a person. If I,
Yeah.
that's, you know, so it just was, you know, it, not, I, fortunately, I wasn't actually doing the care. If I had been doing the care on top of that, I don't know what I would have done. I think I would have really had a hard time. But I mean, I definitely struggled. I mean, it was, watching your parents decline,
Mm.
even though, it's going to happen eventually. I don't think anyone's ready for it.
Right.
And it's just, it's heartbreaking, because, you see other people who are their age, and they're out, doing all kinds of things and being
Yep.
active, and you know exercising and biking and doing all these fun things. And your parents bedridden and in pain and not doing well. And it's just, it's hard. And then you go from that setting to, then, okay, go to the pool or go to a birthday party with your son, and it's like everyone's
Right.
all happy and it's all great. You're like, this it's I saw somebody, I think in one of your episodes, maybe someone referred to this, and there's a word for it. It's like I don't even remember the exact word, but it's like this just shocking change. Like, you go, okay, I'm at the nursing
Yes.
home in the memory care unit, and then I go to the pool, and everyone's all happy and playing. And I'm like, how am I supposed to be happy when I was just seeing, this
Yep.
sad situation, not for just my dad, but for all these other people in this situation. And a lot of them didn't have family to come visit them. And, it's just, it's hard. Um,
Yeah. It
so I
almost
know
sometimes
that's,
feels like you have to have multiple personalities. Like you have to
uh-huh.
switch different parts of yourself depending
Yes.
where you are in life. You have your career self, and then you have your caregiver self, and then you have your parent self. And
Right.
in all of that switching, it all gets blurred, and you lose a sense of which one is the real one or which parts belong to the real one. So
Right.
when you said I didn't feel like a person anymore, that really resonated with me because I didn't feel like I was my own person when I was going through it. I was constantly playing a role.
Right. No, it's definitely hard, but on the flip side, it's I wouldn't trade, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't have
Yep.
not done it. I mean, I was so lucky my husband was working and I was able to be home and I was able to be available for my parents and do the things that they needed. And so, I'm grateful for that.
Mhm.
And I don't have regrets that I should have stopped working so I could be with my parents. Like I was available to them. And it's kind of funny when my dad was, having this end stage dementia. One day I went to visit him and I think he thought I was still working because I think with dementia, a lot of times, the memories, right? It's like, I don't know the
Yeah,
exact
sort of
terminology, but
freezes at
like
a moment
you
in
don't,
time.
right. And so he thought I was still working. I told him I wasn't. So he said, "So what do you do all day?" Like, well, let's see. I take care of you. I take care of mom. I take care of my son. I take care, all these things. But it was just very funny because like
Yeah.
whatever. But so yeah, so it was definitely a very rough period. They passed 5 weeks apart in 2010. So that was hard.
Yeah.
But they both have been suffering in different ways. I mean, my mom was cognitively completely fine, but her body was failing her. And, she was not she was in pain and a lot of challenges. So um, it was a blessing for them to be at peace, but still it's yeah, yesterday
Yeah.
was 15 years since my mom passed, and it was grandparents' day at my son's school
Ugh,
the day she passed. So luckily my in-laws were with him, but I mean, so anyway, it's just it's
yeah.
hard. But I mean, and one thing I think that's really funny, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but so I never had the intention of doing insurance. That's
Mhm.
something that just kind of happened. But my dad was actually with the same insurance company for 50 years and did life insurance and loved it. Loved it, loved it. So I think that they're laughing in heaven, going, "What's going on? You're like, you love insurance, like dad loves insurance." It's just so that's kind of a weird thing to add in.
Yeah. Well, and it does lend itself to later in the conversation because one of the themes that I've learned in talking with my guests, and in my own personal experience, is that caregiving brings out your natural talents and your natural tendencies. So when the caregiving journey ends, it informs what you want to do professionally afterward. It kind of,
Yes.
not to use a tired phrase, but like you have this aha moment
Hmm.
where you go,
Yes.
oh, I have all of these skills and I just have this really important lived experience. How can I bring that all together to make it easier for the people who come after me?
Exactly.
So I'm excited for you to tell that part of the story because it's a really great story. One of the things that I wanted to touch on before we move on is you had mentioned that you're an only child. And a lot of the conversation around caregiving is sometimes, the shared, we'll call it a burden for lack of a better word, among people. And that can be a great system of support. It can also cause consternation. Um, pardon me. But when you are an only child, it's all on you. And so that's its
Yeah.
own separate beehive
Right.
of emotion and tasks and all of those things. Um, were there moments where you thought it would have been really helpful to have this with a sibling? Or was it maybe a little easier because you didn't have to run decisions by anybody else? How did you feel about that?
Um, well, I had a lot of people tell me, "Wow, you're so lucky that you don't have siblings." I've a friend who lost her mother about the same week that I lost mine, and she had
Mm.
siblings. She's like, "Oh, you're so lucky to be an only child." She was obviously having a difficult time with her siblings, and
Mhm.
from what I hear from people, I mean, it does bring out so much. if one sibling is doing more and the other one isn't, and the resentment and the
Mhm.
or the judgments people make about the other sibling. I mean, it sounds like it probably was easier for me than it was for most people because I didn't have anyone to answer to. I didn't have to argue. And luckily, my mom was one of six
Mm.
and very, very close with her siblings. And, so I have, aunts and uncles and cousins who were incredibly supportive during the whole time. And, so that way I didn't feel as alone because of that.
Yeah.
I think if I didn't have that, it would have been really, really hard.
Yeah.
Um, but they were incredibly supportive and that really was, I was leaning on that. And, but yeah, I think it's really hard. And, one of the things I like about what I'm doing now is, if I can help people with the financial piece of a caregiving situation,
Mhm.
maybe there won't be as much stress on the family.
Yeah.
Can't guarantee it, but, there's still going to be, the just the devastation that comes with having a family member who's got this serious health situation going on, but at least
Mhm.
if they know that there's a way to pay for it and that part of it isn't such an argument,
Mhm.
then I feel like that takes off some burden.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something really key that I was hoping was the case, and I think is something that people need to keep in mind, which is there are support systems that exist for you outside of having siblings, right?
Right.
It's friends, it's colleagues, it's neighbors, cousins, aunts and uncles. It is not this preconceived notion of a certain group of people. So, as long
Right.
as they are supportive of you and it's healthy help, then that is what you need. And, sometimes it can be hard when you get stuck in the weeds of this is who I thought would show up, or this is who should be showing up, and they're not. Um, to kind of pivot and see who the people are who are showing up for you.
Right. No, that's such a good point. The other thing I'll say is, as I'm meeting different professionals that are in sort of tangential areas to what I'm doing, I'm just amazed. I mean, the care managers and the daily money managers and just the coaches and just so many different people who are out there to help someone going through this caregiving. And it's just amazing to me. And I think back and I don't know that I would have had the bandwidth to really even know have the time to look and see, okay, well, who was out there who could help me with this? Or I just kind of had my
Right.
head down. I was just doing everything. But I
Hmm.
would definitely urge anyone going through a caregiving situation to join. There are so many great Facebook groups. There's one that's like parent sandwich generation. I can't remember the exact name of it, but people are posting all the time there, or even if it's just people just say, I just have to vent and they'll just post something. And
Hmm.
or reaching out to someone who's a coach who deals with people going through difficult situations with family members, or a daily money manager to come in and help with that part of it, or a care manager to help you. I mean, there's just so many different professionals,
Hmm.
and I think there are more now than there were back then, is my guess. But
Yeah.
I think it's like you said. I mean, like reaching out for help is so important because you think, okay, well, I'm going to do everything myself, but I mean, as humans, we can only take on so much. It's like, okay, I
Hmm.
could handle it. It's like, okay, my mom is having health issues. Okay, that's hard. And then my dad, and then my son was having things going on. It's like as humans, we can only take so much
Hmm.
before we break. And, we don't have to do it all ourselves. I mean, there's so many great people out there who can help.
Yeah. Yeah. So having both parents need help at the same time is something that I have not personally experienced, except for there was one moment where my dad was having some back issues. And of course, my mom was in her journey. So then we had to
Right.
figure out, oh my gosh, what do we do? But
Right.
it wasn't a long-term situation, it was an
Hmm.
acute situation. So in those moments and long term, I'm curious, were there times that you were able to laugh? And if nothing was funny, were there moments of joy, little quiet moments that you were able to share, um, that now you can look back on and say, that was a good day, or that was a good conversation, or I'm glad this happened?
Um, yeah, I'd say a couple things. One was when my dad was in memory care, my son was pretty little. He was, gosh, let's see, how old was he? He would have been like, maybe like, call it like 5 to 8 or something during that time.
Mm.
And so he really didn't see, my son didn't see my dad because I didn't want to take him, as a little kid to a memory care unit. But one of my really close cousins said, you really should take your son, take him. And so, I did take him to see my dad, and it was not that, I can't remember the timing, but it wasn't too long after that my dad passed. And so,
Mm.
I was grateful for that, at least to have done that, because it was something that I was
Yeah.
so uncomfortable. It was such an uncomfortable thing. Like, how do I handle that? But that was something that I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of joy, I mean, I tried to make the best of it, but it was, um, it's kind of a blur, really, honestly, because I mean, it's been 15 years
Yes.
since they've been gone, and it started in 2002. So
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think, I used to work out with a, personal trainer, and that was really helpful because I could at least get some exercise and
Mm.
mental. But I think the trainer I was working with, his dad had a stroke and before he passed. So, like, we had some common things there, and, just someone that understood what was going on. I
Yeah.
found that to be helpful.
Yeah.
And self-care, I mean, when you're going through this, that's number one. I would advise people to just do whatever you can whenever
Hmm.
possible to take care of yourself, because it takes a lot out of you, and you need to keep yourself strong. And
It's really good to highlight the fact that sometimes things are just crappy. Sometimes there's
yeah,
nothing funny. Sometimes it's not enjoyable, and you have to switch gears and do what you need to do for yourself to be able to keep going in the moment. And so
right.
doing what you did absolutely makes sense. And so I do want to be clear. I always ask that question because I want to give people the opportunity to talk about the way that they coped and dealt with
Uh-huh.
what they were going through. But it isn't always funny. And sometimes you do just need to take some time and get some exercise, or get out and put your face in the sunshine, or walk a dog, or whatever it is that
Right.
brings you back to your baseline of, this is how I human, and I'm going
Exactly.
to get through to the next day.
Right. Definitely.
Yeah. So, was there any really good advice that you received, or something that someone did for you while you were caregiving that you found helpful?
I would say the support from family was probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that was, I can't really think of advice. I know I had a doctor one time who said to me, he's like, you know, acknowledging the fact that they're not going to get better, even though that's
Mm,
kind of a harsh thing to say.
yeah.
It's like, if you kind of come to terms with the fact that, it's not like somebody who breaks their leg and then they're fine,
Hmm.
a couple weeks later or whatever it is. I mean, it's not really, I don't know. It's a rough thing because it's like, who wants to even say that, or to receive it either way is hard.
Yeah.
But if you realize, okay, well, this is just the reality that they're not getting better, and
Hmm.
trying to do whatever you can to make them, make your loved one as comfortable as possible, and sort of come to terms with that. I mean, it helps in some ways, but not completely. I mean, nothing really
Yeah.
is perfect, but I thought
Right.
that was sort of helpful in the sense that you kind of realize, okay, well, this is kind of the path we're on, and this is how it's going. But that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
I would imagine that conversation forces a mindset shift,
Uh-huh.
a very uncomfortable one.
Right.
But in some ways, I guess it frees you of considering certain options or wondering if you should be going down certain paths, and it narrows the focus a bit, I guess.
Mhm. And it's hard. I like to control things or have the what's the right way to say it?
The
Like I
illusion of control.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's perfect. So to be in a situation where, there's something you can do, you can't,
Yeah,
someone has dementia, somebody has, my mom was on dialysis, I had to go through that. And it's like, you can't, she wasn't a candidate for transplant. And like, it's like, you can't fix things, and
right.
accepting the fact that you can't be the one to fix it it's hard.
It's very
Because you want
hard.
to fix it, like I'm a problem solver. I want to, if there's something, give me a challenge and I'll figure out a way to solve it. And
Yep.
to not be able to solve the problem or fix the situation is I feel kind of helpless. But I mean, that's just how it is, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I'm very glad that you shared that because in the conversations that I've had with lots of caregivers in the last couple of years, I think that's probably the biggest personality trait commonality is that the people who take on the role are problem solvers and they
mhm,
are the fix it people. And unfortunately, a lot of the caregiving gets to a point where there is nothing to fix. And then having to resolve that for yourself um, is really difficult when you're not used to losing. So, we talked a little earlier about this marriage of career and what you learn in caregiving and the talents that you bring to caregiving. And so, when the caregiving journey ended, how did that inform what you do now?
right. Well, initially, I mean, right after my parents passed, I feel like I was a zombie walking around, not knowing what to do with myself. The
Yeah.
combination of grieving, and then, when you have that, even though I wasn't physically doing the care, all the different jobs I was doing, to keep things going for everybody.
Hmm.
When that just goes away suddenly, you're sort of like, okay, well, now what do I do? What am I
Hmm.
supposed to do? Like, I had this job and now it's gone and I'm not helping anybody. What am I supposed to do? So it was just sort of, it
Yeah.
took a while to just sort of, almost like decompress from that. Um, I had to go through, my parents had been in the house I grew up in, for, I don't know, 40 years. So I had to go through everything, figure out what to keep, what not to keep. And I mean, my mom was very organized, so that was good, but it was just a lot, 40 years
Mhm.
being in a house.
Yeah.
I was really fortunate. One of my cousins bought my mom's house. So
Oh,
that
wow.
was that was really special for me because I didn't have to just say goodbye completely to it.
Yeah.
So that made it a lot easier. If I had to just completely just sell it to a stranger and then never get to be there again, I think that would have been really hard. So that was a blessing that
Yeah.
happened.
I can
And
speak from experience. That part's no fun.
yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, so I went through that, and then, I went through a period of, volunteering at my son's school and just trying to kind of figure out what to do. And then at a certain point, I felt like, Katie, I'm like, I'm not helping anybody really. I'm
Mm,
doing, the errands, and I guess it helps my family that I go to the cleaners in the grocery store and Costco and whatnot, but I'm not really making a difference. I'm not, that's the thing with caregiving. It's like, at least, you feel like you're obviously helping someone,
right.
and
Yeah.
there's a lot of that meaning to that and importance in that. And then to go from that to just not really doing anything.
Yep.
So I was looking for something that I thought would fit in, and I kind of fell into becoming a financial advisor. Um, but it's kind of the perfect thing for me because it's similar to, I did family law before, and so it was dealing with personal issues, very sensitive issue.
Hmm.
Someone's money is about one of the most sensitive things, and I had done,
Yeah.
family law before, so I was dealing with people going through divorce and very personal issues. And so from that perspective, it felt like a really good fit. And then in recent years, I've really become, I would say, obsessed with long-term care insurance is fair. Because of, my parents, my dad had it, my mom couldn't get it at the time. But, because he had it, that made things so much easier for our family. And I, like I said before, like if I can help people with the financial part of it,
Mhm.
at least take away that stress, then I feel like if I can sort of pay it forward that way
Yeah.
and help people, and it just sort of fills my cup. It just makes me happy to be able to teach people about it and get people set up so that, you know, there's not as much of a burden on their family members, and the person can have a choice as to what kind of care they get and where they
Mhm.
get it, as opposed to, if you have no money and you have to go Medicaid, or if you, have to go a certain place because of the way their long-term care policy is set up, like they have to go to a facility or they have to go certain place. I don't know. It just makes me feel good to know that I can help people get that part in place.
Yeah.
So,
Um, excuse me, it's allergy season
oh
here in
yes.
Delaware. Um, so you just mentioned how your dad had long-term care insurance and how that made things a little bit easier. Um, can you share what long-term care insurance is and what it covers? Because I think a lot of people aren't exactly clear on it.
Oh, I think you're right about that for sure. So what long-term care insurance does is it covers the cost to get a caregiver either in your home or to go to a facility, but it's the things that aren't medical in nature. So they're
Mhm.
not covered by Medicare or health insurance. So it's the things that you do that you don't even think about getting through your day. You get out of bed, you go to the bathroom, take a shower or bath, you get dressed, you eat, you maintain continence, things like those are called the activities of daily living.
Mhm.
And if someone can't do 2 out of the 6 of those, or if they have a severe cognitive impairment and it's expected to last at least 90 days, then that's considered a long-term care event that would trigger if you have insurance. So what it does is it covers the payment of either like a caregiver at home or going to a facility, so that there's money available for that because it isn't covered by insurance.
Mhm.
So people think, oh, well, Medicare is just going to cover it. Well, it doesn't. It only covers if you're in the hospital for 3 days, assuming you're at least 65, obviously, to be on Medicare. And
Mhm.
then you're in the hospital 3 days, and then you get, a total of 100 days that you can go to rehab after the hospitalization. But they only cover the first 20 days 100%. And then the next 21 to 100 days, you have a copay. And then that's assuming you progress with physical therapy. But if you don't progress, they can kick you out. So let's say somebody has a stroke and they're not progressing in physical therapy, so they can't stay in the rehab anymore, covered by Medicare. So then they have to either go home or go to a facility, and it's not paid for by any insurance, any
Right.
Medicare or health insurance. So you need to dip into savings or investments or retirement accounts if you have them, if you're lucky enough to have them. If you don't have any money, then Medicaid will cover, if you're down to $2,000, then Medicaid would cover it. But then you don't really have any choice. And some places don't allow home care for Medicaid, some do. So the whole point of long-term care insurance is to have a dedicated source of funds. So if you need care, you have some source of funds to dip into that doesn't disrupt your whole financial plan.
Mhm.
And any money that comes out of a long-term care insurance policy is tax-free, so it doesn't impact you in terms of your taxes. So
Okay.
that's and people think of it that it's only for nursing homes or it's only for old people, but it could be, let's say somebody is perfectly healthy and they're in a car accident that's really severe and they need help
Mhm.
getting around or doing this bathing and dressing and transferring things. Let's say somebody's skiing and they break 2 legs and an arm and they can't get around for 6 months. They could be,
Yeah.
40, 50, and they can't work and they can't, get around. They need someone to help them. They need to pay somebody to come in and help them. Where are you going to come up with, it's somewhere around anywhere 35 to $45 an hour for a home caregiver. you
Mhm.
know do people have anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 in cash just lying around that they won't miss if they spend on a care situation like that? So the idea is to put this in place so that you have it if you need it.
Mhm.
um, Now there are some, I don't know how much you want me to go into as far as the different types, but I don't want to go too crazy with it. You just tell me.
You can give people a general idea of what
Okay,
maybe the different options are,
sure.
because I think one of the key things to think about here is if you don't have the money for someone to go into a facility, but you have just enough that Medicaid's not going to cover it, they're coming home with someone,
Right,
right? And
exactly.
then that's going to impact your life, your just day-to-day life.
Yes,
It's going to impact likely your career because now you're going to have to figure out how to take care of this person and take time off and whatever else. Um,
exactly.
so knowing what the different options are, I think is blah, 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 blah. Boy, I'm having a tough time today.
Huh?
Is helpful, um, given what the different scenarios could be.
Right. Well, one thing, I'll tell you about the different types, but one thing that's kind of exciting is that it used to be a lot of employers would offer long-term care as a work benefit, but it's sort of having a resurgence now. It had gone away for a while, but so I would say if you work for, a big or well, maybe not a huge company, but just it's always good to check at work to see if they offer that, if they do, to find out what you can get with that.
Mhm,
But just generally speaking, there are two main kinds of long-term care insurance. There's traditional, which has been around forever, and that's the kind where it's like a car insurance policy. You pay in. If you never need any care, then there's no cash value. You don't get any money back.
mhm,
Um, but you get the most leverage, you get the most bang for your buck with that kind of a policy. So you put in the least amount of money to get the most amount of coverage. So that
mhm,
part is good if someone doesn't have a lot of assets, but they want to have some protection. You can put depending how old you are, you can put some money into that. And then the money is available for you if you need care. A couple things that are tricky with that, like I said, you don't get anything back if you don't use it, and then the premiums are not guaranteed level, so they can increase.
mm. Okay.
People who have policies that got policies a long time ago are seeing a lot of increases because when they first came out with long-term care policies, they priced them way too low. They gave
Mm,
very, very robust benefits, and they assumed that a lot of people were going to let the policies lapse,
mhm,
but then people didn't let their policies lapse. So they had all these people with these really generous benefits, and they're all going on claim. And then the company's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? We don't have enough money to cover all these claims. So they had to raise premiums and raise them and raise them and raise them.
mm.
The ones that
Okay.
have come out now they've taken into account all that's gone on and all that went wrong. And so if you get a traditional policy today, it's priced more, it's a little bit higher price than, relative to how it was before, but it's less likely to have the gigantic increases. It probably still will have some,
Mhm,
but it's a good option for lots of people. And then because people didn't like the use it or lose it nature of the traditional, they now have policies called asset based, or
mhm,
they might be called hybrid or combo or linked benefit. That's where you couple either a life insurance policy or an annuity with a second bucket of money that extends for long-term care. And the thing that's nice with those is that if you don't need care, then there's a death benefit that goes to your beneficiary.
oh, okay.
So it could be all that you put in, it could be some, it depends how you structure it. But the idea is, when you get the contract, a certain amount is going to come back guaranteed. If you
Mhm,
never need care, at least X dollars is going back to your beneficiaries.
right.
And the other thing that's really nice is that the premiums are guaranteed level, even if you pay it over time.
Mm,
So you know how much you're paying, you know everything. It's all guaranteed and there are no surprises. And I don't know about you, but I don't love surprises when it comes to
not
things like that.
financial ones.
Right, exactly. So that's a really great option that wasn't always available and not many people know about it. It's pretty
Yeah.
surprising. So,
Well, and that's interesting because, I mean, obviously the death benefit presumably could be used for anything. But if you think about what funerals cost and
mhm,
paying estate taxes and all of those things, that benefit can come in quite handy, I would imagine.
right. And I think it's just psychologically, knowing that you're paying money into something and that you know that a certain money amount is going to come out, because a lot of people say, well, okay, well, 56% of people over 65 are going to need some kind of care. Yet everyone says it's not going to be me. Well,
Right.
chances are most people are going to need at least something. Maybe it's not a
Yeah.
lot. Maybe you're 100 years old and you're just kind of frail. You need somebody, just to help you. And one thing I want to mention too is that you don't necessarily need someone to actually do the things for you. Like like the 100-year-old person, for example. Like let's say they're at risk of falling, and so they need somebody to be there when they take a shower or a bath. but
Hmm.
they don't need the person to really do anything. It's more just like for safety.
Right.
Or if there's someone with dementia that you're worried about wandering, or you're worried about turning on the stove or leaving the stove on, or different things. Like, so a
Hmm.
lot of it has to do with, keeping a person safe throughout the day, but it isn't, it doesn't mean someone's bedridden and they can't do anything at all for themselves. It could be that maybe
Right.
they're okay. Maybe they're, can do lots of things, but there are just a few things where they're not safe. And so that's
Hmm.
something that would kick in. So,
Yeah, just a level of supervision, and I would imagine
mhm.
also just some company, right?
Right.
One of the things that we talked about before are certified long-term care insurance providers. And so, how do you know if someone's certified? Where do you go to find that information, and what's entailed? So, what's the difference between someone who's certified and someone who's not?
Good question. So, yeah, so I have a designation, it's called, it's CLTC, which is certified in long-term care. It's just, that's that's something that you can get once you've been insurance licensed, and then you've taken the basic long-term care courses that you need to take in order to be able to sell long-term care insurance. And it's just an extra amount of education that a lot of it focuses on how to address, the concerns that so many people have in terms of, well, I'm not going to need care, and why should I need care? So it's just an extra level of education and product knowledge, and it shows that somebody, really, really, really want to help with long-term care versus just doing it as an add-on to other things that they're doing. So, I mean, looking to see
Mhm.
that someone has the CLTC designation is helpful. I would say that if someone's working with it, let's say they're working with their financial advisor, and I'm an advisor, so I don't want to bash other advisors, but there are many who don't specialize in long-term care. And so they have one policy that is their go-to for everybody. And that can be really problematic in a lot of different ways. With long-term care, your health has to be good in order for you to qualify. With
Mm.
the traditional plans, the underwriting is pretty strict because you're not giving them as much money. But with the asset-based plans, you're giving them more of your own money, so there's more leeway there, for the underwriting. But with long-term care, if you apply and get declined, you could either never be able to get it at all, or you might not be able to get it for several years. You have to wait a
Mm.
while. And
Oh.
so it's really important that whoever you work with on the front end is asking you about your medical situation. They're
Hmm.
asking you what medicines you take, if any, what medical history, what your medical history is. Um, Another couple of things that are really important. If someone's in physical therapy and they apply for long-term care insurance, they're going to either get declined or postponed. So you have to be
Okay.
out of physical therapy. You can't have a pending surgery or any kind of major pending medical appointment. The insurance companies want to see stability.
Mm.
Um, so what I always do is if anyone says anything other than just a very basic, like maybe if someone takes like for medicine for like cholesterol and blood pressure, or like very basic things, like I will anonymously shop the companies ahead of time and say, okay, here's this scenario. Would you consider coverage? And then we weed out the companies that would not consider offering somebody coverage, so that we know, okay, well, out of the like 7 companies, 3 are no goes, but 4 are possibilities. And then from there, I can start designing plans for people and showing them the different options. But I think a lot of times, whether it's advisors or agents, they just, okay, you want long-term care, here's XYZ product, let's apply. And they don't get into the questions about the medical history, and then the person gets
Mm.
declined. And then what? Then you're stuck with either not getting it at all or having to wait a long time. So I would say whoever you work with, you want to see that they're asking you about your medical history, and that they're looking at multiple products, not just one for everybody, because they're
Mhm.
different. I mean, I could go on for hours about all the different variables, and I won't bore you, but there's so many different variables that we can change around when we're designing plans. And so, you want somebody who understands all the nuances of the different policies, and why, okay, this person has this medical condition, they should go with this company, or they have that, they should go with the other company, and then there's
Mhm.
just a million different things to it. And so, um, if someone's either CLTC or they specialize in long-term care, I think that's a lot better than just going with someone who's a jack of all trades, and in addition to
Right.
doing lots of other things, they also dabble, because there's so many changes that come up and so many different options to keep keep track of. I mean, if someone's an advisor, busy advisor managing hundreds of clients and keeping up with the market and keeping up with all these different things, I mean, they don't have time to keep up with all this. I mean, it's just
Right.
not enough hours in the day for that. Nothing against them. I mean, they could be the smartest and best advisor out there, but if they're not spending a lot of time doing this,
Mhm.
they're not going to know that products changed, or they're not going to know that. I don't know. I just think it's so important to work with someone who specializes.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to mess around with this.
No,
So something that you said made me think of another question. Um, you want to be as healthy as possible when you're going through this process. So, what age? I know health can change at any time. So, let's
right,
table that for a second.
right.
But generally speaking, at what age should people be looking at this and getting a plan in place?
I would say it's good to start in your 40s,
Hmm.
just and look and see, learn about it, find out about it. If you have any kind of health conditions, find out which companies might be options for you. You know, Depending on someone's financial situation, it's they might not be able to afford an asset-based plan, but maybe they could get a traditional plan to put in place temporarily.
Hmm.
And then, not when I say temporarily, meaning like you put it in place, and then later on, if you have a different financial picture, you could potentially get a new policy instead of the old one, or add one on to the old one. I mean, there's like you can have multiple policies. So you could get something to start off, like a starter policy when you're younger, just so you have some coverage. But then if you are able to, potentially add on something later on. But yeah, I would say like 40s is a good time to start. Mid 50s is kind of where I see most people actually putting policies in place. But
Okay.
the younger you are, I mean, you have a greater chance of getting approved, and the premiums will be lower.
Right.
And with the asset base, it's set up so you either pay all at once or you pay over time, but it's kind of locked in at your age. So it's like with life insurance, why not lock it in when you're younger if you're able to do it? And then you
Hmm.
benefit from that lower premium the whole time versus, people waiting till 60 or later. I mean, you can still get it, but it's just the longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to be. And you
Right.
limit, you reduce the chances of being able to qualify.
Yeah. And so I'm sure there is quite a range, but can you share, generally speaking, um, what this type of thing costs, just so people can start to think about it and whether, they need to start saving, especially if they're in their 30s and they're looking at this, 10, 15
Right.
years down the line. I
Right.
wish I would have had this conversation 10, 15 years ago and known
Right.
now that I'm in my mid 40s.
Right. I mean, it really depends. I mean, I was looking for someone yesterday, like a 42-year-old woman for, $200 a month. She could get, I don't remember what the monthly amount was. I think it was around maybe a $5,000 a month benefit to start, but then it will grow. We put a inflation protection on there, so every year it would grow by, let's say, 3% compound.
Hmm.
Um, so it won't be a huge benefit by the time she's in her 80s. I think it would be around 15,000 a month, which
Hmm.
is, today an assisted living could cost that much.
Right.
Um, so it's not going to pay for everything, but
Hmm.
if it pays for, 50% or 60% of your expense, and you're only having to come up with the remainder,
Hmm.
it can be a huge benefit. I got a policy last year where I'm paying in a total of $120,000 over 10 years.
Hmm.
And in my 80s, God willing, I'll have like over $1 million for care if I need it.
Wow. Yeah.
So for 120,000 to get you $1 million guaranteed if
Hmm.
you need it. And then if I don't need any care, then it's about $145,000 death benefit.
Hmm.
So it's not inexpensive. People always say, "Oh, it's so expensive." Well, care is so expensive. So
And
it's relative.
what is the cost if you don't have a plan,
Yeah,
right? And the cost is higher.
oh, right. I mean, Genworth has a really good, you can go in, if you Google Genworth cost of care calculator, you can put
Hmm.
in your area. It won't have it down to the zip code, but they'll take the closest metropolitan area to where you live, and it'll
Hmm.
show you how much is it today. And then there's this little slider you can do and say, okay, well, in 30 years, how much is it going to cost? And that's just a
Yeah.
projection. Obviously, it's not a guarantee of anything, but it
Hmm.
gives you an idea, if it's if 44 hours of care today is somewhere around 6,000, and it's going up by about 5% a year,
Wow.
that's just for some home care. So, when you look at facility care, I mean, it's pretty scary. So I think
Yeah.
whatever you can do to put something in place, I mean, it's basically like getting yourself a 50% off or 70% off coupon. Like
Right.
you're not having
Yeah.
to pay the whole amount out of pocket. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have someone else pay for things for me if I don't have to pay it myself. If I can put in some money and
Absolutely.
get some leverage. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for educating us on that because it's not something, this is a whole other conversation about what you should be learning in school,
Oh gosh.
but it's not something that is covered by most math classes or general
Hmm.
understanding of how the world works. So we have to find people like you who are willing to share their expertise. Um, when we spoke before, you told me about a really special thing that you do for potential clients. And I would love for you to share what that is with our listeners. So if anybody is interested, they can contact you and also tell them how to
Sure.
contact you.
Of course. So right. So if somebody, let's say you or your parent have a policy and it's 30 years old, dusty somewhere in a drawer, and you have no idea what kind of coverage you have, you can get in touch with me and I will call the company with you or with your, we'll have to, if it's like if the parent has the policy, maybe if you're the power of attorney, we can do it or get the parent on the line. But anyway, we could call and find out what the coverage is, and then I can explain it to you in plain English so that you know what you have. Because I think a lot of times people get policies and then they don't really understand them at the time. So 30 years later, you're certainly not going to understand it or remember what you have. And so, it could be you have only home care or only facility care, or you have more money than you thought you had. But um, a lot of times people don't really understand the policies, and the older policies weren't uniform. So I can't just assume that, okay, well, someone has a policy, so it must cover everything. The newer policies cover home care, facility care, adult daycare. They even have a provision for any alternative forms of care that might be invented in the future, because who knows if there'll be
Right.
robots or whatever taking care of us. But the older policies are all over the place. And so it's really important to know before there's a crisis, if possible, what
Yes.
you have. So, people can reach out to me and I'm happy to do that. And I don't charge for my time for that because I just think it's so important to know what you've got in place. And, you went to the trouble of getting a policy and paying for it. You should know what it is and, how much benefit you have. And so that if someone needs it, they can trigger the claim and take advantage of all those, they've paid all those years, they should take advantage of the benefit.
Right. Absolutely. So we'll put your contact information in the episode description, but
Okay.
feel free to share the best way for people to reach out to you here as well. So anybody who's
Oh,
listening, they can jot it down.
sure. Sure. They can just email me at Suzanne at sgsinsurance.net. They can email me there, or I'm on LinkedIn, and um, you'll share my information on like my website and all that. But
Yep.
yeah, feel free to reach out. And I love teaching people about this and helping them. I just think people deserve to know that this is out there. This is a big threat. It's the biggest threat to well-planned retirement. I mean, you can have everything else in place, and it's like a Jenga game. It's like
Hmm.
this happens, and it just completely disrupts everything. So
Right.
um, I just feel really strongly that people should just know it's out there. You know, if this isn't the way to go, or if they can't qualify, then you have to make other arrangements and make plans so that you make sure you have something in place.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you to everyone out there who joined us for this episode. You can always find additional information at carefulist.com. And until next time, take care.